Let's summarize our week 9 module. This week we learned about some of the most important agreements that we will likely be dealing with when we put together a film or TV project, and we learned about most of the important terms and conditions that would likely apply. So what did we discuss this week? This week we covered a module that included the important terms and conditions for essential agreements in connection with film and television projects. Understand the risks and mitigate them by including protective terms and conditions in the essential agreements. Understand the essential terms geared toward transparency and profit. Risks and mitigation strategies is something we need to look into before we can really tackle all these terms and conditions for the agreements. Important terms and conditions apply with banks, lenders, investors, and co-producing partners. Understand the reason behind crucial terms and protect the project yourself as the producer and your investor by applying essential terms and conditions in these relevant agreements in the most optimal way. You now should be able to identify risks and be able to mitigate or eliminate them, and you should be able to identify important terms and conditions in most of the essential agreements regarding film and television productions. What to do this week? So if you haven't done so yet, please read the following module sections and watch the videos. Risk mitigation and profit optimization, production risks, distribution risks, revenue and profit risks, essential agreements and terms part 1, essential agreements in regards to production, essential agreements in regards to rights and chain of title, essential agreements in regards to packaging, cast and director, essential agreements for financing, and watch the video for case study 9 for the television series Kill Me Now. And then watch the summary video, which is this one, and you're watching it right now. Don't forget to watch the guest speaker interviews and watch all the case study videos. And read chapter 10 in the textbook Entertainment Finance Today. We're going to have a Zoom session on Saturday again at 10 a.m. The discussion for Kill Me Now Season 2 is to do on Sunday again, and then your quiz number 8 is also due on Sunday. And if you work on the extra credit project, please take part in the meetings and come to finalizing your project and getting it ready for the pitching session that is coming up soon. Let's take a look at some of the risks we could be facing. Producers and investors must understand the risks and learn how to mitigate them in order to protect revenues and profits in relation to a film or television project. The main risks in film and television are often associated to the financing sections, the production, the distribution, and the actual revenue and profit section. While not all risks can be entirely eliminated, most can be mitigated through production insurance, completion bond insurance, collection agents, and certain terms and conditions in production, distribution, and finance agreements. And we'll go into them right now. Understand and eliminate risks to protect your project and your revenues, and with that, your investors. There are 3 main areas to identify when addressing these potential risks in the entertainment industry. So we're talking about production risks first. The risk of production is limited not just to the actual physical production, but it also includes the development phase. And there is a bunch of risks that are associated there in regards to securing rights, securing talent, packaging. The funding phase has its own risks when we finance our project with the various sources that we have to negotiate deals for, and we have to match in an ideal balance. And we have to understand what best terms and conditions to include. And of course, there are various risks associated with the physical production itself and the post-production phase, all the way to the delivery of the film or TV project to the distributor and including their technical acceptance. When we talk about distribution risk, we're talking about the distribution phase, and we're often here dealing with issues related to the sales agent, especially in connection with performance clauses. We also are dealing sometimes with distribution rights assignment issues And we might be dealing with auditing issues for distribution revenues as well as related reporting issues. And when we talk about revenue and profits, we often talk about the risk related to the collection of those revenues from the sales agents, from the distributors, but also from the box office. Let's start by looking at the production risk, and here we will start with the development phase. So first we're looking at the chain of title, which has to do with the securing of all rights, including the underlying rights. We have to check that all rights to a project are cleared, are clean, that there are no underlying issues, and that any underlying rights associated to the project have also been secured. We also have to look into turnaround components, seeing if there are any monies that were created in the development phase with another producer on this project are applicable and might have to be paid. We need to make sure that we include our own turnaround provisions in case we are unable to realize the project, so we are protected with any costs that we are generating in case someone else is going to do the project after us and then has to pay those costs to us. And we have to make sure that we protect our investor who would provide development financing to develop the project and to attach cast and to get it ready for production financing and for production. This investor and its money has to also be included and connected to the IP and in the turnaround provision. So when we talk about packaging in that phase, we have to make sure that the director that we are casting is approved by the cast. We have to make sure that we have a kill provision in the director deal in case he or she is not approved by cast or cannot be bonded. And we have to make sure that the director is in line with the bond company, especially in relation to their vision and their ability to produce the project in the budget range. The same appears for the cast. The cast also has to be completion bondable. The insurance has to check their health status, has to check if they are bondable, if there are any issues. We have to issue a pay or play offer to the cast. Ideally, condition precedent should be the bond condition and making sure that they can be insured. We have to talk to our equity investor to make sure that they can financially back the offer, this pay or play offer that we're making for the actor. We should look at the pay or play offer to be including all the elements that we need to include, which is the shooting location, the shooting period, the remuneration, all the perks, all the extra shooting days that are necessary for publicity and ADRs and any post-production work that needs to be done. And we need to make sure that the pay or play offer is very much detailed so that the engagement letter can include all the pay or play offer terms and nothing has to be negotiated from scratch. This is a conversation we're going to have with the agency, with the representation of the actor when we are locking them in and making them connected and firmly connected to our project. This agreement is also part of our development cost participation, our turnaround cost. So it is part of our production risk. And the risk here is that we will not be making the movie and that we might owe the director and the cast what we have engaged them under, meaning whatever the remuneration is that is mentioned in the agreement for the cast and the director might have to be payable. We might have to pay it, even though we're not making the movie. So we need to make sure that we have a turnaround provision that in case someone else would ever make the movie because we couldn't make it, will then reimburse these costs to us. It is very essential that when we make these offers to cast or director that we have had a conversation with an investor before and that we understand also by having a conversation with the sales agent that we are attaching cast and director elements that can support the sales estimates as well as the pre-sales that are needed in order to structure a finance plan and close the financing for a film. And the production risk also includes, of course, our fundraising. And here we have a few risks we need to be aware of and should ideally be addressed be addressing early on. So when we work with an investor or an equity finance group, it is essential to understand the terms and conditions early so that the deal can be closed with them. Because if we cannot match their terms and conditions with other finance sources we are putting in place, we're going to have issues when we're trying to close the film. Here are a few things to ask for to avoid potential issues. We should always ask for a proof of funds to understand that the investor has the necessary funding to work with us. We should talk to the investor and ask if he has funded content before, and maybe speak to the producer of the film or TV show that they have financed. Understanding if there were any issues with that project would be important. It would be an indication for us to potentially having to deal with similar issues with this investor. We want to understand the role the investor would like to take. What kind of approval rights would he or she like? Would he have an active role? Would he like to approve certain things? So our job would be to make sure that the approval rights are very limited, in fact limited only to aspects that change the value or the risk profile of the project. And these are literally limited to changing cast in a way that the value of the project is changing, or changing the genre in a way that the value of the project is changing, or changing the investor's recoupment position, which in that case would change the risk profile. So those are the three areas we need to probably give the investor an approval right, but there shouldn't be any further approval rights applicable for an investor, so we should limit those. And when it comes to the role of the investor, we should and can allow them to, come to set and be there and enjoy the Hollywood vibe, when we are doing a premiere, or go to the red carpet or something like that. But the investor should not be expecting to have a role where they make decisions on set, or where they make decisions in regards to any kind of distribution agreement, or any agreement for that matter. And certainly not any creative decisions. So we should really make sure that the investor understands the limitations of what his or her role would entail. Most investors do not really want to have a role and do not really want to take any responsibility. They're mainly there to financially support a project. But some are interested in applying a wider role, and we should make sure that we know what that is and then limit that to the best of our abilities as producers. We should talk to the investor about the risk appetite. Do they want to do equity, which recoups in last position? Do they want to do a loan, which recoups in first position, if it's a senior loan? Certain investors actually like to recoup in first position and do therefore not want to be recouping last. Now that first position recoupment can also be an equity position. So we need to understand what the risk appetite for the investor is, and then we need to structure the deal accordingly. For us, it's important that if the investor wants to recoup in first position and then takes over the senior loan position, that we will limit the investment to, as I mentioned before, ideally no more than 55%, maximum 60%, so that the ownership is not going to be too high for ownership in the IP and profit participation. We have talked about this before, that the investment related to the budget reflects 50% of the ownership component the investor would have in the IP and in the profits. We need to talk to the investor about how we are mitigating production risk and distribution risks, of course, but especially about the fact that we're using a completion bond company and that we are using a collection agency to protect our revenues. This is something that they will want to see, and this is something that we have to put in place. There are different ways to approach an investor. We can do a PPM, which is a private placement memorandum that's usually done in the US, but it can only be used for accredited investors in some cases. In some cases, you have to actually have a broker that has a license to present this PPM to an investor. So it's not necessarily something we can do on our own, depending on what it is. But there can also be a business plan where we include the investor as a business partner, which is a simple finance agreement that we can apply. I mean, nothing is ever simple about it, but in essence, it would be a business agreement that includes an investment. The idea here is to make sure that whenever we approach an investor, to understand the limitations and regulations the Security and Exchange Commission applies for investors in the US. Now, these change sometimes, and there isn't anyone that can tell you what happens at any given time without actually looking at what has changed recently. So I always suggest that if you want to go with the PPM option, and if you want to approach an investor in the US in accordance with the SEC, to go to their website and familiarize yourself with the current rules and regulations, or use a brokerage firm that would very likely know about these things. There are tax implications for investors when they invest with us, and those should best be something that they would discuss with their CPA. It's not something that a producer should be discussing with them, because we're not CPAs. We don't know the tax situation of this investor, and we should probably stay out of that and have them discuss it with their CPA. When we deal with loans, we're talking about banks, we're talking about lenders, and they should give us a term sheet which tells us exactly early on what kind of interest fees we have to expect, what kind of discounting for pre-sales we have to deal with, and what our net loan in the end would look like after all these loan fees and interest charges and discounts have been applied. That is extremely important to have early on, simply because we need to know how much balance we have to cover with our equity investor. And we also need to understand that these investors or lenders may not necessarily need a completion bond. So if that is the case, we have to figure out what are we going to do in case of budget overages, because that will be the next question that the investor is going to ask us. If you go over budget and you don't have a completion bond, how are you going to handle that? Because I'm not giving you more money. So how are you going to deal with that? A way around it would be to have a very significant or sizable contingency, which is a safety cushion in case we do go over budget. Most banks that give us a gap loan will require a completion bond insurance, but there are some lenders who cash flow pre-sales and tax incentives, for example, who do not require a completion bond insurance. Another risk during the production is the pre-production phase. Here we should really think about limiting our expenses during pre-production, because this is a time where we are putting all the finance sources together, we are preparing the completion bond insurance issuance, and we're dealing with pre-production of the project in order to get it ready for shooting. So we should really be careful in how much money we're actually spending during that period. So we should have crew members there in that phase with us that are absolutely necessary. So we don't have to have half the crew, or even the entire crew, or even a third of the crew during the early production, pre-production phase, because it's not necessary. So for us, it's important to be very careful with overhead, location scouting, location itself, crews, etc., etc. Any of these pre-production costs that we have to incur should really be focused on getting us to have the completion bond insurance be issued, so that funds can be released to us and we can continue the pre-production with the funds that we have raised for the production. Otherwise, we're paying them ourselves, and if the film falls apart last minute, which it can, we would then have lost that money in the first instance. So during pre-production, it is essential to make sure that we take care of the costs that we have to take care of, but are also very careful in case we incur delays. For some reason, for example, the director could change their vision, then we figure out the vision is not approved by the cast, the completion bonder, the producer, the distributor, etc. This is something that can cause us to stop the production and having to find a new director. This happened to me on one of the movies which I shared with you. We also can have a situation where a piece of the financing falls out last minute and must be replaced, and this happens before the bond company is issued, bond company insurance is issued, which is something that happens all the time. So we also need to prepare plan B for certain financiers who may or may not come through for us. So if we, for example, haven't seen a proof of funds from someone, or if someone is dragging their feet in regards to negotiating their finance deal with us, we need to have a few plan Bs in line in case some of these sources fall short last minute. It could also be that we're changing locations last minute because the incentive regulations have changed in a certain location where we're planning to shoot. All of a sudden, it might not be so attractive anymore. This also happens all the time. So then we need to figure out a different location in order to not screw up our finance plan, because we were, of course, expecting a certain level of incentive. We could also have a situation where the director or the actor decide not to show up. I've not ever had that with a director, but I have had that with an actor, and that is, of course, a problem. We can then, go and sue the actor, sue the agent, but it's not going to be hugely helpful in that very moment, because lawsuits take years and they may or may not work out. So for us, that means we're going to have to replace this actor very quickly. It will cause a delay for our production, but at least we will have a chance to then continue the movie. So the solution here would be find another actor to replace this actor, and find one that has similar or higher value so that the sales estimates and pre-sales are not affected. We also have had a situation where we were building a set for a special movie and the set wasn't ready. So the construction, as we have sometimes happened with construction, was delayed. In that case too, we can experience a delay that can cost us money, because we have to stop the production until the set piece is ready. When we deal with the political or natural disaster, that obviously is a very rare situation. I have never dealt with that, but I have to list it here in case it does happen. Sometimes it's insured, sometimes it's not insured, and today, with all the changes with insurance in regards to recent developments, we always have to make sure that certain things, or that most of the things that can happen to us, are insured through the production insurance and the completion bond insurance. And of course, during the production phase itself, we can face certain risks. It's funny enough, once the completion bond is insured, has insured the production, the risks are really limited. You're dealing with risks when you do not have a completion bond insurance, because then you deal with risk for budget overages. You go over budget, the production has started, it's not really going in accordance with the schedule, there are reasons why it's being delayed, and you don't have an insurance for any of it. So this is going to most likely be a problem. And it does happen a lot, and it happens especially with films that are not that don't have a completion bond insurance. Sometimes you also deal with films that are not properly insured. So you might have a production insurance, you might not have a completion bond insurance, they're not necessarily the same, and maybe this production insurance does not cover certain things that are now happening. I have seen that happen with production. So it is important for you, when you are producing a movie and you are investing in a movie, to make sure that all the production aspects are insured. So when you have a good completion bond company and production insurance, you will not be dealing with any of this. There is also a problem here to do with abandonment, which is in essence related to budget overages, but could also have to do with the fact that maybe you have no production insurance or completion bond insurance, and your actor gets ill or dies or doesn't show up or whatnot. This could cause a production stop for the first instance while you are recasting. And sometimes I've seen situations with producers, they just don't continue. They don't find the right cast. The delay is too long. It gets too expensive. They don't have enough money. And then this whole entire project is abandoned, and whoever has spent money until that point is likely going to lose it. So the production risk is best handled and ideally handled through a completion bond insurance, because most of the risks mentioned here do then not apply. The post-production, of course, also has a few risks associated to it, often to do with the post-production schedule, especially for films that have, say, large visual effects components that could often be delayed. So you can have delays that are caused by an editor that's just really slow, or has to do with the fact that the director is very indecisive and can't really get their director's cut done. In many cases, for my films, I limit the time I give the director to do their cut, but some producers don't do that, and then they're sitting there months and months and months with the director until they can finally make their cut. It could also be that the producer is indecisive and they cannot make up their mind. Same reason here. So we usually have a delivery date that is a bonded delivery date, and this would mean, again, because of the compulsion bond insurance, that this risk would not be applicable because the bond company would force the director and or the producer to make a decision and figure it out. There could be delays that are caused with the post-production facility. Sometimes they're overbooked, they don't have enough space, they don't have enough available editing suites. I personally have never experienced that, but I've heard that other producers had issues with post-production houses that have caused delays. There could also be a situation where you're putting your movie together, you're editing it, and you're realizing that maybe some material isn't properly shot, or the material is faulty, or you're missing shots for some reason. So then you have to go out and do these shots and shoot these missing scenes, which can obviously cause a delay. There could be a delay through actors not showing, I mean, it's not because they're not showing up on set, but because they are not showing up for ADR sessions, meaning sound recording sessions. And that you have to deal with very often in film and television shows, where you have to re-record certain sounds because there might be issues with them, or you might want to put a different kind of dialogue on a certain scene. So actors do usually have that in their contract, that they have to be available for that, but some actors take their time in showing up. Could be an issue. There are certain delivery elements that sales agents or distributors require, where they might add elements to the delivery list. I personally have not had that happen, but I've heard that some distributors have changed their mind about the delivery elements that they want, and then they have to be generated, and that takes a little time. It could also be that the technical acceptance is taking longer. So we're sending the movie to the distributor does their technical testing to make sure it matches their specifications and their technical specifications, and then they come back and say, well, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, so we then have to fix it. And if it takes too long to fix it, or if there is too much to fix, this can also delay the post-production schedule. The final cut is an issue if you give the director final cut. I don't give directors final cut. I've never done that. I try not to do that, simply because this means that the director has the control over the final product, and it could cause issues. So for me, as an investor and producer, I have to keep the control over the product, and I cannot allow the director to change that and have control over the product that we're investing in. So in my case, there will not be any final cut. And today, most directors do not have final cut, even if they're A-level directors. So the idea here for the producer is not to give the director final cut, because that could delay the process. Again, as we talked about earlier, an indecisive director with final cut could drag their feet, and it could take forever. Let's take a look at some of the distribution risks we could be facing. Well, there is always the option that we have no distribution deal. So imagine the situation where you have produced a show or a movie and you have not done any pre-sales because you thought it's not necessary, or you didn't think it was something that you needed to do. You had an investor who was okay financing it without pre-sales. So now you finished your movie or you finished your project and you're not selling it. It's not getting, any traction. No one in the US is buying it. No one internationally is buying it. And now you're sitting on your movie and it's not being distributed at all, which means it's not going to make any money. And this actually happens a lot. So I would always say, to avoid this, make sure you have pre-sales. Make sure you sign up a sales agent who will work with you very closely in generating the distribution revenues you hopefully will receive in accordance with the sales estimates that were issued by the sales agent when you started the relationship with them. And here's the second risk. What can happen is that these sales estimates do not materialize. So you might have done pre-sales, and the pre-sales are supportive of the sales estimates, and then you do the movie and it's finished and it's really poorly executed. It happens. It's not what distributors would expect. So that means that once the movie is finished, you still get your money from the distributors who pre-bought the movie. They're going to not be happy to having to pay it because the movie is not what they hoped for, but they have no choice. They have to pay you. But everyone else who you haven't sold the movie to can now see the movie in the film markets at the screenings, and they might not like it. So that means that the unsold rights that you have estimated to make money with will not materialize in the way you hoped. So you make less money than you thought you would, and that has to do many times with poor execution of what was originally a great package and a great script. Sometimes what happens is a movie is aging, or a project is aging. So you're putting it together, it's taking a longer time to put it together. Distributors have seen it at a few markets, and maybe some have pre-bought it, but it's not moving forward. The longer it takes for a project to get made, the more dangerous is it, because the value normally is lower. It lowers itself because it takes too long. People might change their mind, and distributors are not excited about it anymore. So the idea is to be able to pre-sale your pre-sales that you have to do, ideally a third of the budget, within the first 3 or 4 markets where the movie is still fresh and distributors are still excited about it, and then continue quickly in getting your bank loan done and getting your equity lined up, because the longer you take, the harder it's going to be to get the movie made. Obviously there are exceptions to the rule. I have actually produced a movie that was in the making for 6 years and couldn't get made, and then we decided to produce and finance it, and it turned out to be a successful movie for us. So there are exceptions to that rule, but generally there is an aging process going on, especially when you, to go back to the first example, have made a movie that you didn't do pre-sales for and are not, hoping to sell distribution rights for, and it's not selling, and now it's getting older and older and older, and the longer the movie is made and the longer it's not selling, the lower are the possibilities of it generating significant distribution revenues. There are situations where, when you don't do pre-sales or are unable to do pre-sales, you're also not going to be able to get a bank loan. So that will force you automatically to increase your equity investment, and you really have to then look at equity and an incentive, and brand integration, which is much harder to do, and it's much more risky for the investor, and it's also not ideal for you. So a bank loan is a good way for you to include distribution financing, because it enables you to lower your equity investment and get cheaper money. The loss of investment is always the case, and that's a huge risk with distribution, when distribution revenues are not received as estimated, as projected, and will therefore have a huge performance risk for the investor. When we look at distribution risk, excuse me, we're also looking at sales agent performance risk, of course. We do have, we have to make sure as producers and investors that we work with sales agents who can perform for us. However, you're going to face in your career likely a sales agent that is not performing for you, meaning they do a sales agency agreement with you, they issue sales estimates for you, and then they're not selling in accordance with what those sales estimates are projecting. The reasons for that could be A, the movie was poorly executed, as we talked about earlier, which is not really their fault. But it could also be, if the movie is well executed, that they're not being aggressive enough or don't have the right relationships with the buyers that would buy this. So for you, it would be important as a producer or investor to make sure that you put a performance clause in the agreement with the sales agent that is connected to the sales estimates that they have issued. The situation is also so that you're going to have an exclusive term that you give the sales agent, which means that they can, during that time, kind of do with the movie whatever they want. So if you don't have a performance clause in there that states, we're going to realize this percentage of the sales estimates by that time and this percentage by that time. So if you don't have defined default clauses in there that are connected with the sales estimates and timing by which they have to be realized, then it could very well be, because the sales agent have an exclusive term, that they literally don't have to sell anything during that entire time. Doesn't usually happen, because sales agents don't make money when they don't sell. They don't get commission, but it has been seen that sales agents take their time in selling and are not very aggressive at times. The The bad execution component, as I mentioned earlier, is a risk for the sales agent as well, because again, they make only money if they sell something. And if the movie that they hoped for would be a great movie for them to make money with and put into their lineup is now turning out to be a badly executed movie, then they just wasted a space in their lineup and are losing money. So it's not good for them as well. The quality of a movie is also extremely important. This is usually tricky and often the case when you deal with low budget projects where the production quality is suffering. But when you have a normal budget of a bonded movie, you often don't deal with quality issues, because those movies are technically produced properly with the right equipment, with the right cameras, with the right lighting. So there shouldn't be an issue on the technical side. But there are some movies that are just real bad production quality, and those will have a hard time to get sold. The issue that we're also facing often is because of so much competition in the marketplace and so much content in the marketplace, marketing is extremely important to make the buyers aware of the movie that is being sold through the sales agent. So there needs to be some marketing that needs to happen to kind of get some buzz going for the film coming to market. And if a sales agent doesn't do that properly or doesn't do any marketing, then that also means that the buyers are not showing up at the booth, at the market, and don't even know about the movie because they have never heard of it. And they don't just come by, to say hello and drink coffee. They usually come by because they know there is a movie that they want to look at and potentially want to pre-buy or buy. So if there is no information about the movie been provided and no marketing that has been done, then no one is going to come look for it. So that's something that we have to make sure when we talk to a sales agent is going to be addressed. How are they going to market the movie? What are they going to do? And they're going to tell us their plan, and hopefully we'll realize their plan. Some sales agents, especially newer sales agents, when they are eager to get a project lineup for their company, might be overstating the relationships that they have with buyers. I actually had one situation where I trusted in a newer sales agent with a project that I had because I wanted to support their company, and that person came from a larger sales agency that they worked for before. So my assumption was that they do have relationships, and it turned out they did not have the essential relationships I would have needed in order for my project to be sold properly to the right buyer. So this can happen. So it is important for anyone who does a movie to work with an established sales agent that's in the market for a certain period of time, a longer period of time, and knows the buyers very well. There is always an issue when I would say a lot of times there is an issue when there is no collection agency provision in the sales agency agreement, which then means that the distributors pay the license fee to the sales agent, and the sales agent would then provide a report to the producer and release whatever distribution revenues they have received minus whatever sales fee and expenses they charge against it. It is not ideal for the sales agent to be doing this, because sales agents are not accountants, and they are sales agents. So even if they have an accounting department, it is something that you have to trust as a producer is done the right way. And you don't really want to do that, and you don't really tell your investor, I'm sorry, I don't know what the sales agent is doing, and I have no way of knowing if he actually reported all the sales that were made and if he actually reported the proper sales expenses as well. This is not a conversation you want to have with your investor, and it's really not necessary. So put a collection agency clause in there and have the collection agent do their job in collecting the revenues and paying expenses, loans, and investments back. There is a risk for bankruptcy. And I have had a situation where one of my movies was with a sales agent who went bankrupt, and it became part of the bankruptcy mess. I'm still dealing with that mess, literally, and I don't want other producers to have to deal with it. So the ideal here would be to add a provision in a sales agency agreement. That's something a lawyer would need to do, and say that in case of a bankruptcy, all rights fall back to the producer, so that the movie or the project is not part of the bankruptcy mess should there be an issue. Sales agents, when they get distribution revenues themselves, have a tendency to report very slowly. I've seen this many times with producers that I work with on their projects and sometimes consult for that are dealing with a project where they did not have a collection agent and are now fighting with the sales agent over revenues. And I stepped in a few times in helping that process and getting these producers and their investors paid. And it always have to do with sales agents not reporting or very slowly reporting. Again, this can be avoided by including a collection agent. We have covered some of this in our pitfalls of distribution, but it can't hurt to refresh this. We talked about the fact that the sales agent is not a distributor. Therefore, there should not be any rights assignments that is applicable here. The sales agent should only work on behalf of the producer in selling the film on behalf of the producer. They do not have to have any rights to the film other than having the exclusive right to sell. That's it. Now, if the sales agent provides in advance a minimum guarantee, then sometimes they do have the right to be a distributor because now they're paying something, and sometimes they want rights for what they paid. So in that case, a certain right assignment could be applicable that is negotiated in connection with an advance that the sales agent will give the producer. In that case, the rights have to be very clearly defined. What is being given to the producer, to the sales agent, for what reason, for what amount, for what time, so that the scope of this distribution component is very clearly defined. The co-producer situation happens a lot too, where two producers come together and they decide to do a movie together, for example, and they say we do everything together, we split all the rights. And then as they continue to work with each other, it turns out that one person is doing all the work, the other person is doing nothing. Happens a lot. In that case, there is nothing much one can do, because if it's not defined who does what and that they're only getting rights or revenues based on the scope that they have delivered on, which is often not defined in these co-production agreements, then the producer is stuck with this other person and is going to have to pay them 50% of the IP or whatever they agreed. So the idea here is, when you do a co-production agreement with a producer who you are putting together a project with, really define the scope of what each of you are doing and define it so that any payment and any rights are only applicable and only assigned if that scope is in fact fulfilled during the period that it has to be fulfilled. Otherwise, it's not non-defined, and then it gets very difficult. There are situations where you're going to have to do a co-producing agreement with an incentive producer, meaning someone who is in a local country where you want to obtain an incentive and they are applying for the incentive for you. In that case, you do have to often assign the rights to this producer, and you should make sure that there is a provision that assigns these rights back to you at a certain time after the incentive was provided. There are certain rules and regulations you need to know about in regards to where the incentive is coming from. Not every country will allow the assignment back to you, so you should really be careful when you do incentives agreements in other countries, and really watch the incentive regulations closely to make sure you're not losing your IP. There are, when we talk about distribution risks, of course, also auditing risks. One is, we mentioned this earlier with the sales agent, when we don't have a collection agent in place, we end up having to audit them at some point, figuring out, are they reporting all the agreements that they made? Are they reporting the expenses correctly? Are these expenses actually related to my film, or are they not related to my film? So we do then, in a situation like that, deal with a long-winded auditing process, which is often very expensive. It's something to avoid, and again, you can avoid it by engaging a collection agent. There are distributors who are not always forward when it comes to paying overages. As we talked about, overages are payments that are made to you in addition to the minimum guarantee, the license fee that the distributor paid you for a distribution agreement. And in case of a great performance of your film in that country, and if they have made so much money that their minimum guarantee that they paid you is paid back, all the P&A that they paid to take the movie into the theater locally is paid, all the expenses are paid, that they were allowed to deduct per the distribution agreement that you have with them. So everything is paid and there is money left over. They are supposed to give you 50% of that. For most of the distribution agreements that I have dealt with, it's a 50-50 split for what is called overages. And not all the distributors are honest about this. So in that case, you have the right to audit that distributor in that country and see how much money did they actually make, did they deduct the right expenses that were contractually obligated, or did they deduct more that they weren't allowed to deduct, and so forth. So this is something to consider for an audit. Also, usually that kind of audit is expensive too. So if you ever do an audit, make sure that you have reason to believe that it's worth it. The producers can, of course, in a case like that, deal with the distributor directly and not having to deal with the sales agent in between. But normally, it would be the sales agent who would contact the distributor to say, hey, what's going on? Did you guys have overages applicable? Can we see a report? Can you send it to us? So often it's the sales agent who contacts the distributors to find out if there was any overage revenue participation applicable. Long story short, to avoid any auditing and revenue risk, you ideally have everyone be a part of your CAMA, your collection agent management agreement. That includes your sales agent, your distributors, everyone who has invested and lent money to your film project, and anyone who is supposed to be getting any money as expenses or profits. If this is handled through a collection agent management agreement, you're not going to be dealing with audits because you're protected through the collection agent. We talked about box office risk in a sense that we don't really deal with that much. Now, when we have a project that we are deciding to release in the theaters, let's say through a rent-a-studio deal, or we self-release it, or in any way decided we want to release this film and we have a P&A investor and we're now going to go out and do a 1,000 screen release in the US, for example. Here, you are going to be subject to box office risk simply because you have a P&A investor in there, and you have marketing expenses and print and advertising expenses for this campaign that are on top of your budget that you have to deal with. So in that case, you would be subject to a box office risk, and all the investors and lenders in the movie with you would then be subject to this box office risk because there is a P&A investor who is now recouping in front of them, and that changes their risk profile. So it is very important that whenever you do this kind of finance structure and include a P&A investor, that you let all the other investors know what the deal is with this P&A investor. Is this P&A investor only recouping from the US, which would be the ideal? But if the P&A investor is also recouping from international distribution rights revenues, that could not be ideal. So you want to try to keep the P&A investor recouping from the US box office, in which case the investors and banks are not as negatively affected by the potential box office flop if it doesn't work out. Now, in a national box office, we don't have to deal with as producers when we sell our distribution rights through a sales agent, because the local distributor releases the film in the international territory and the theaters, and they deal with P&A and print and advertising money there, and they handle the local campaign, and they expense all that expenditure that they have themselves. They will, of course, deduct it from what could be our overages, so we might not have any, but if the film does not do well, we also don't have a risk. So how do we manage these various financial risks? So in the development, we manage them by controlling the IP. We secure the rights properly. We make sure that the co-production agreements, the rights purchase agreements, and the chain of title, everything is done the way it's supposed to. We eliminate any turnaround provisions that could affect us negatively. We protect our own development financing through a turnaround provision. We make sure that we have proper talent agreements in place, and we make sure that our sales projections are in line with our budget and vice versa. When we talk about development financing with an investor, we make sure that there is a turnaround provision to protect that investment, and we are handling the repayment through a method that we are paying development financing out of the budget on closing to the investor, including the premium. We make sure that we have a bonded budget with the bond company that includes a proper production cash flow plan, a proper delivery schedule, and a budget that is bonded and feasible. We want to make sure that we have a solid financial plan where all our financial elements are balanced in a healthy way. We have market verification through bankable pre-sales and sales. We have incentive loans that are non-recoupable. We have some other non-recoupable finance sources in our finance plan to offset the risk for the lender and the investor. We have loan and equity investments in a healthy balance applicable in our finance plan. We make sure that our distribution agreements do include industry standard sales fees and distribution fees and expenses, as well as performance clauses. And we make sure that we have, of course, our collection agency provision in there. And we make sure that the rights agreements that we are doing with the sales agent are affecting the proper term, infracting the proper minimum guarantee payments and overages provisions. While there is definite risk diversification applicable with slate financing simply because an investor finances more than one film and therefore diversifies their risk, there are also issues with that. So when I talk about slate financing, and we do this quite a bit, I manage the slate financing investments by putting investment criteria on the slate financing in the entirety. That means I make sure that the finance model that is applicable for the entire slate is one that would be the same for the movie. So I will not invest more than 35% in equity in my slate with a finance plan that includes a senior loan of about 20% for GAAP. I will make sure that for the slate, all films have a 20% non-recoupable finance component in there, which could be through an incentive or another non-recoupable finance source. I will also make sure that the slate financing requires that any film in the slate must have pre-sales of at least 30% of the budget. And I will also make sure that any movie in the slate can perform and shows international sales estimates of 70% of the budget. So what I'm doing here with my slate is I'm making sure that whatever project is connected to the slate and in the slate is valuable, so that in case something does not work as projected, at least we have other projects that can pick up the slack for the slate, so to speak. What I also do to diversify is I put projects in that have different budget sizes. So it's not all $10 million movies or all $15 million movies. I put in low budget television series that are documentary series. I put in drama series that are more expensive. I put in low budget movies. I put in medium sized movies. So I put in varied budget and varied genres that allow me to have a bucket of different kind of product. So I'm not just diversifying through budgets, but I'm also diversifying through content and genres. I make sure that when I put the slate together, I put slate titles in there that I can realize within the time that the application of funds is supposed to happen. So I'm not going to put a project in there that I'm going to have to develop for 10 years. So I'm going to put the slate together in a way that I know that the movies that I have put in there or the TV series I have put in there can be going in production within the next 1 or 2 years. Maximum would be 3 years, so that I can diversify the funds and use the revenues to produce other projects in the slate as well. I always make sure that I control all the rights of the films, so therefore I can also control their progress. So if I don't, for example, if I have a movie in the slate that is not controlled by me but by another producer, then I don't really control how soon it can close, how fast it can be produced. So that would be a problem for me. So therefore, I can only put movies into the slate where I have total control over the film and the realization process. I would have to make sure that the talent packaging is managed efficiently as well. So I cannot really take the time of years and years and years to package actors on there, which I've seen. It happens. So I have to have varied options for actors to be available for these movies and can be attached fairly quickly. They have to, if I have to, for example, replace a project, which can happen, let's say we have one project there where we just cannot find an actor and it cannot be packaged and we just cannot make any progress, I would then replace that project with another project where things might go a little faster. And I can do that, but I would have to replace it with a project of similar or higher value so that the risk profile for the entire slate is not changing. I also have to make sure that when I do a slate financing with a company that gives me the money, like a hedge fund or an investment firm, that they're not charging me what is called unused commitment fees, which means they would give me the money for the slate and it takes me 3 years to place the money into my projects. And for the 3 years that I have, trying to place the money and I haven't used it, they're charging me interest or charging me a fee even though I haven't applied their funds. That can add up quickly and can get very expensive. So I will try to do a deal with the people or the entity that gives me the slate financing that would exclude unused commitment fees, if I can. I also want to make sure that the finance fees, or if it's a loan, that the interest fees are feasible and affordable, so that I don't have to have huge finance fees in the budget, which then makes it harder to produce a quality film with A-level actors. So I will make sure early on with whoever provides me the slate financing that their closing costs and their fees are manageable for us. We'll obviously want to make sure that whoever is selling our movie is doing it for a reduced sales fee because we are providing a volume which then in turn can optimize our profits. We also want to think about and ideally enter into some kind of a first look arrangement with certain buyers. Again, when we do slates and we provide a volume of content, those conversations can be had, which means we can automatically plug in certain deals, certain distribution deals without having to go shop around or do pre-sales. We have to make sure for slates that the producing team and the directors, everyone on the team that is producing and realizing the projects in the slate, have a certain track record so that they can facilitate the process very efficiently and professionally. Let's take a look at some of the essential agreements. I'm going to list the main essential agreements and terms and conditions that I have experienced and that I have dealt with, and there might be others and they might not all be applicable to you, but I'm sharing with you the kind of agreements I enter into and I have entered into on my productions and how I've handled them. So for producer agreements, I have done the LLC agreement, which is the operating agreement for the LLC, which is a limited liability company that I launch for every film or every project I do. So every time I do a project, it has its own LLC, its own company. And I will then, with that LLC, enter into all the agreements that I need to enter into, which could be cast agreements, distribution agreements, finance agreements, and anything else. It's going to be this LLC, that's the movie-related or project-related LLC, that enters into all these agreements. It will also be this LLC that I'm going to engage an attorney with to then handle this project. And any producers that I work with in combination with my project that might help me to get it done or to provide a certain scope that speeds up the process in getting the project made, those producer agreements would also be done with this LLC. In the producing agreements, if I have other producers, I will be very careful and very definitive about the scope that the other producer has. So let's say if I have a producer whose responsibility is to package certain actors for me for this movie, their remuneration, profit participation, and potential relationship to the movie is contingent upon their delivery of that scope. So that means I have to deliver this actor by that time, otherwise that deal is null and void. So anytime I do a co-producing agreement with another producer, I define what it is for, what the job of the producer is, and how much money they get for doing that. So when I do my cast and director agreements, I often do them as pay or place, and it would then include the title of the project, of course, the shooting period and the location, the project elements, like this is the director, this is the budget, this is where we're shooting, this is how long we're shooting, this is the role for the cast member, for example, that I would want them to play, what kind of salary am I paying them, what kind of perks will be negotiated, and then any kind of contingencies that I want to apply, like the issuance of a completion bond. All of this is going to be part of the pay or play and the detailed engagement agreement. So when I do finance agreements, I have various options. I can do a development investment agreement, which is an investor who supports me in getting the project packaged, getting it prepared, excuse me, to be funded and produced and bonded. And that development investment is part of my development cost in my budget, including the premium that would be due on this development investment, which would be repaid on the day of closing. The development investor would not wait until distribution revenues are generated with this project. They would get paid on the day I am closing on my financing and starting production. The equity investor is a different situation. Equity investors are part of the distribution revenues when it comes to their repayment. So that agreement would include things like the profit participation that is being paid, the premium that is being paid, and any kind of approval rights that might be applicable. Ideally, there aren't any, and any kind of recoupment positioning that needs to be approved by them. So for example, if an equity investor says, I want to recoup in first position, it would not be possible for you to do a bank loan because the investor and the bank loan wouldn't match and wouldn't be combinable. If the equity investor says, I want to have approval over cast, your job is to limit this approval in a way that you say you have the right to replace the cast with someone of equal or similar value. Anything that changes the risk profile for the investor, they will likely have a right to approve, which has to do with sales estimates, recoupment position, and value of the film. The senior loan agreement is something that is based early on a bindable term sheet that is issued by a bank, and that term sheet lays out the discounting that might be applied for certain pre-sales, and it lays out the interest and loan fees and legal fees that are being charged in connection with the loan and that are being deducted as a reserved and then paid for when recoupment distribution revenues are coming in. The junior loan agreement is similar to the senior loan. There is a term sheet that can talk about what is going to happen here, what is the interest, what is the loan amount, is there any profit participation or premium applicable, and the loan agreement would then be subject to the term sheet. Both entities normally, meaning the senior lender and the junior lender, they normally issue term sheets. The senior lender usually always does. The junior lender, it really depends on who the junior lender is, but those term sheets can tell us early on what the terms are, and then we can still decide whether or not they work for us as producers. There's an incentive loan agreement with a lender who will have an estimate done based on what expenses are eligible in the region that we're shooting the movie in, and how much that will be then altogether for the incentive loan. This incentive estimate will be done by someone that the lender approves. And then based on that estimate, the lender will give us a loan in advance and then will be repaid by the incentive region, not by us. So they would handle all the paperwork in connection with the repayment of the loan from the incentive region. They will likely charge us a fee up front and will deduct that fee from the incentive loan that we will be given. There are co-production finance agreements where we have subsidy investment or subsidy grants coming from other countries, also basically an incentive, but in that case we have to likely do a co-production agreement with a local producer in order to obtain that incentive. There are brand integration agreements that we can do with advertising agencies or the brands directly that talk about the inclusion of a certain brand in a certain way with a certain message in our movie, and the payment that is being made for that, which is usually paid in installments, some version up front, and then the other payment when the movie is finished. There is a music investment agreement that can be done that will allocate this investment towards the music budget, and this investment is recouped from music royalty revenues. There are deferment provisions that would be part of potential agreements like crew deals, like the director or the cast deal. If anyone defers any part of their salary, it would be part of their agreement with the producer, and it would state what kind of deferment is applicable. Is there a premium applicable on top of the deferred amount, and when is it being paid? And then the last finance agreement that we want to talk about here is the collection agent management agreement, which basically includes all these agreements and combines all the finance and distribution agreements in one big agreement that reflects all the terms everyone has agreed to, and it includes everyone who has given an investment, given a loan, is owed an expense or a payment or a profit participation, or has a deferment, or is in any way connected to the movie in a financial way. We're going to go through a list of agreements, and they may not be complete because closing, as you will learn when you go into the next modules, is quite complex. So there are a lot of agreements that are part of this closing process. And they really also vary depending on what kind of movie one is working on, what the parties are in connection with the movie, what kind of movie it is, or what kind of TV project it is. So there are different agreements applicable depending on the movie and the scope of the project. But let's talk about some that mostly will be finding their way into your production. So when we talk about first in line option and rights, we have to make sure that if we do a deal with someone who is in the guild, we apply any guild regulations. When we do an option term, if we want to do an option for at least 1 year plus an extension, I usually do 1 year plus at least 1 year plus another option to extend. I want to make sure that in my option agreements, my option payment goes against the purchase price, so the purchase price is reduced by the option payment. I want to have a turnaround provision in there in all my agreements to make sure in case I cannot realize the movie, somehow the money comes back being paid to me by someone else who does it. I want to have rewrite regulations in my purchase agreement to make sure I know what rewrites I can get for free and how many do I have to pay for. I want to define the rights very clearly to make sure I get all the rights I need, including sequel, remake, spin-off rights, and so forth. I want to make sure that the chain of title is complete, and I want to make sure that the option agreements and related rights agreement will find their way into the collection agent management agreement. So when we talk about the talent deals with the writer and with the director, let's start there. Often I do a pay or play for directors as well, which could also include or be replaced by what is like a development deal. In that case, I would do a deal with the director and saying, let's develop this project together. Maybe he would write a version of the script, and in that case would be paid for that. And the pay or play offer will usually The terms in the pay or play offer will find their way into what is called the engagement letter. That's kind of the long form agreement that I would enter into with the director, and it includes everything from what is the remuneration, are there any contingencies, what are the perks, is there any profit participation, are there any bonuses. I want to make sure that there's no final cut in there. I want to apply the WGA, sorry, not the WGA, but the DGA, the Directors Guild regulations, because it also defines how long the director can take to cut their director's cut. And of course, I want to make sure that the director is bondable, and I want to make sure that the director understands the budget and will adhere to the budget and is healthy, and all those things that are important for the director to realize the project in relation to my vision, in relation to the approval of the actor, and of course in relation to the bond company that has to bond the director's vision and his way of directing the film. When it comes to talent, again, I'm doing a pay or play offer in there where I give the talent, if it's A-level talent, the right to approve the director. And for the director, that means I would have to have a kill fee provision in there in case the director is not approved by cast, so I can let him go and maybe have to pay him something. I want to do contingencies for the talent deal, such as the completion bond insurance needs to be issued in order for this deal to be legally viable. We'll talk about remuneration, perks, and profits and bonuses, of course. We want to make sure that the cast has no creative approval, and we want to make sure that if the cast is a Screen Actors Guild member, that we adhere to the SAG rules and regulations. If this cast is going to be a profit participant, they would also be part of the collection agent management agreement. When it comes to the sales agency agreement, we want to make sure that we can approve the estimates. We want to make sure that there is a performance clause that is connected to the estimates. We want to make sure that there are pre-sales discussed and a time frame discussed by which those pre-sales are to be established. Is there potentially a minimum guarantee that the sales agent is paid? What does it do? Is it going to change the rights? Is it going to change the sales fee or distribution fees? We want to talk about that. We want to make sure that the sales agent has no creative approval right. Of course, we want industry standard feasible sales fees and expenses to be applied. We might have to ask the sales agent to recoup their expenses and sales fees after the senior loan has recouped, if that is a requirement of the senior lender. We want to cap their marketing fees and expenses at a certain number, so maybe we say you get 1% expenses up to this amount and no more. We talked about the performance clause that needs to be in there, which is connected to a default provision. If they don't perform, we can get out of the contract. We talk about delivery elements that the sales agent would require and a delivery schedule by which the film has to be delivered. We talk about a collection agency provision, and we make sure that the sales agent is part of the collection agent management agreement. For all the distribution agreements that we're doing, we're agreeing to a minimum guarantee, which is a license fee and an overage split. We're defining if there is any profit, how that's going to be handled. We're defining the payment terms when we do a distribution agreement, which usually means you get 10 to 20% as a down payment at the time the distribution agreement is entered into, and then 80% or 90%, depending on what it is agreed at the time the movie is delivered to the distributor. We're talking, of course, what rights are being sold, how long are they being sold for, which is the term, and what territory are they being sold for, which is the country. We're talking about what delivery elements the distributor would like to see, and we make sure that the distributor understands that they have no creative approval and no approval at all in case of changes. So if we pre-sale, for example, a movie and we have a cast defined, some distribution agreements would include that cast name. So let's say, for example, I'm pre-selling a movie with Jason Statham, and a German buyer comes to me and says, I'm going to buy this movie with Jason Statham, and I want Jason Statham to be mentioned in the agreement. I can only do that if I add a language that says I have the right to replace him if I have to replace him, and I would then replace him with someone of equal or higher value. And in that case, I can then put the name of the cast member in the agreement. The next thing is we often work with lawyers on these productions. It is It has been seen that lawyers want retainers. That's an upfront payment for them to be working on something. And then they would have an hourly rate and they would charge a monthly bill. I don't like doing that. So what I usually do is I give them a percentage of the budget. I talk to them about a project and I tell them, do you want to handle this project? I'll give you X% of the budget, and that's a flat fee. So for me, that has proven to be a better situation. Some lawyers do it and some lawyers don't. It's really depending on the law firm that you work with. So when we talk about crew and service agreements, and there are two kinds of agreements that you can find. You can find the independent contractor agreement, or you can do a regular payroll with, in that case, a payroll company who would pay your crew members. You would pay the payroll company, they pay your crew members, they handle the fringes, they handle workers' comp insurance, they handle everything. That's the better way to do it. If you have a small production that is very short, of course you can do independent contractors, but you must make sure that you are allowed to do it and that this production qualifies for an independent contractor situation. You would discuss a rate with every crew member, and often those rates are based on the guild rates that are applicable where you're shooting. You can do a deal with the guild to say, I'm doing a low budget movie, I want a low budget, a special guild deal, and then you can potentially use union crew for a lower rate. But you can only do that if the guild allows that. So that's a conversation to be had early on with the applicable guild that you might be working under. So you talk about travel, if there are travel, you talk about overtime. That is usually handled by guild rates as well. Then you see if you hire someone who has maybe their own camera equipment, it's called a box rental or a rental fee that you would pay them in addition to the remuneration if you want to use their equipment. Or for example, a costume designer or makeup hair artist, they usually bring their own materials, and you can give them a box rental in addition to the remuneration that you would pay them, to the rate that you would pay them. You always, obviously, in the crew agreement, discuss the scope, you discuss the credit that they would have, and you discuss as well if they have any deferment or profit participation applicable. These are the main items you would discuss in a crew service agreement, and that is normally done by the line producer or the unit production manager, those kind of deals. Then there is a producer service agreement that can be done with, which is something that is between you and the bond company, for example, but it could also be between you and another producer. In essence, what you have to define in this agreement is the scope of service, what is being done, what is the exact scope, what has to be delivered by when, what is the fee for that, is there profit participation or a deferment applicable, are there any rights that you would be sharing with the producer or not, are there any milestones that have to be met in order for them to see a remuneration or profit participation or an IP right component, and is there any turnaround applicable, meaning if you pay them something and the movie doesn't get made, those kind of fees have to be paid back to you by whoever else is making the movie. So there should always be a turnaround provision. But there's also a case for turnaround where, for example, you could work with a producer who is able to help you attach a certain cast member. Let's say you work with a producer and he has a relationship with Jason Statham, to stick with Jason Statham's name for this example, and he attaches Jason Statham to the movie. And then for whatever reason you get into it with the producer, or their producing agreement expires, or something happens and you're not going to continue to work with them. They do have a turnaround provision in a sense that they still get paid as long as their actor that they attached is still in the movie. So even if they don't do anything else ever again, and even if they don't do anything with you, as long as you're their actor that they package is in the movie, you still have to pay them. So that's kind of a turnaround provision that could be applicable, especially for a producer who helps you with casting. You're going to have to do a guild signatory agreement for the production company that's handling the movie, so make sure you are working with the signatory departments for the three main guilds we have here, with your SAG, WGA, and DGA. and understand what kind of residuals you might have to deal with if you do have to pay a bond to them. And of course, they're going to be in the collection agent management agreement. The completion bond agreement is one where the completion bonder gets to approve the budget, they get to approve the production schedule, and they get to approve the production cash flow plan, they get to approve the director and the talent, they get to approve the line producer and the accountant, they get to approve the chain of title. They will not like that you have stop dates in there, so you want to avoid those, which means you want to make sure that you don't have an actor who has to be on another movie right after yours. They might require a producer fee holdback from you, meaning that some of the fees that are budgeted to be paid to you are going to be held back by them in case you have budget overages, in which case they would use those fees. And they're going to get paid to you once the movie is delivered. And you can talk to them about exclusions. What are some items that you don't need the bond company to insure, which you can then exclude so the bond fee can be reduced. And then, of course, there is the CAMA, the Collection Agent Management Agreement, which has designed a waterfall for us that dictates who gets paid what, when from distribution revenues. You usually have signatories in there that are the producer, the lender, the investor, the sales agent, the distributor, the guilds, and any profit participants. And then there are the production agreements in relation to the SPV. So what you're going to do is you're going to put together an LLC or another form of a company that handles the production. So that way all the agreements that you do would be done with this production entity that handles the movie. So that entity would have to have an operating agreement. If it's an LLC, it will talk about who the members are, who the shareholders are in this LLC. Is it the investor with you? Is it just you as a producer? It will talk about profit splits. It will talk about overhead, some tax applications that are applicable for this company. It will talk about what the company does and the rights it has and the scope. And of course, it is the entity that will be in the collection agent management agreement. So we're doing a case study here, case study 9, the TV series Kill Me Now. This is a television series. We're going to do 10 one-hour episodes in this first season for the budget of $25 million. And the way we're producing this series is we are going to do a Canadian co-production. So that means that Canada will give us a 30% incentive of the below-the-line expenses. And the below-the-line expenses are estimated to be $18 million. The incentive producer that is going to help us to obtain this incentive is going to charge us a 5% fee on the incentive amount and will furthermore request 50% of our back-end profit participation. Let's look at our sales estimates and distribution components. We have sales estimates of 70% of the budget, and we excluded Canada. We have Netflix acquiring 35% of the budget for the US and Canada. Netflix was going to pay 10% as a down payment. We have European pre-sales of 30% of the budget with a 10% down payment. We have a sales agent charging us 15% sales fee and 1% distribution expenses. We're going to use a bank loan. The bank loan will cash flow all the pre-sales at 80%. So 80% of the pre-sale distribution license fees are being provided to us as a pre-sale loan. The gap loan is going to be up to 20% of the budget and requires that the pre-sales, the unsold rights are providing a 200% coverage of this gap loan. We're going to pay 9% interest rate for both of them, and we're going to have to pay a loan fee of $50,000. The series will have brand integration of $350,000. We have to pay 25% to an agency, and we have crowdfunding of $250,000, and we have to pay a 15% commission upfront. There's going to be in-kind services offered to us from our post-production house. They will defer basically 50% of the post-production cost, which are 15% of our budget. So 50% of 15% of the budget are going to be deferred, and a 10% premium is going to be charged. We're going to have guild residuals that will be deducted in the revenue recoupment component, so in the revenue schedule of $50,000, and they are deducted after the senior loan and the distribution fees and expenses have been paid. So that's where the guild residuals will be sitting in the recoupment plan in our case. And then we have, of course, our equity investor covering the balance that is needed to cover the actual production costs, which we also refer to as the strike price. And that is the production without any deferments or any in-kind service deals. So the equity investor is getting 20% premium and 50% of whatever percentage he funded in relation to the budget. We have to do some profit participation here. The director, the showrunner, and the lead cast each get 15% from our backend, and then remember that we have to pay the Canadian co-producer 50% of our backend. So these are the assumptions that are being placed for us on this television series. So let's take a look at what that would do with our funding schedule. This case study is also in your module in a detailed video. So if I'm going too fast here, please feel free to watch the actual case study video that takes you through this case study step by step. So in this case, we're starting with the budget that is $25 million for the TV show. The strike price is $23,125,000, and the reason for that is that 50% of the post-production budget was deferred. The post-production budget was 15% of $25 million, which is $3,750,000. 50% of that is $1,875,000, and that is being deferred. That means it reduces our budget and the need for financing. So our strike price budget is going to be $23,125,000, and that's the number we need to hit. So we mentioned earlier that Netflix is going to do a 35% of the budget deal with us for the US and Canada, which is 35% of $25 million in this case, because it's our entire budget. That's $8,750,000. We are assuming that 70% of our budget can be generated through international rights revenues, which would be $17,500,000. So altogether, we're hoping to make $26,250,000 with the movie. So let's start with the pre-sale loan and see how far we get when we do a senior loan. So Netflix, who's doing a 35% pre-sale loan, would be there with $8,750,000. Our pre-sales in general were 30% of the budget, so that's $7,500,000. So altogether, our pre-sales are $16,250,000. The down payment that we're receiving for this is 10%, so that is $1,625,000. So the first funding amount we have generated right now is the down payment for these agreements, which is $1,625,000. So let's take a look at the bank loan. The pre-sale loan is going to be discounted to 80%. So 80% would basically be 80% of $16,250,000, and that is $13 million. The bank recognizes that we already received a 10% down payment and therefore deducts the 10%, which is $1,625,000 from the loan amount, leaving us with $11,375,000. Then they're deducting their interest of 9%, so we're back down to $10,351,250. So the unsold rights are going to be $10 million worth. The bank will only give us $5 million because they require 200% collateral. So that would be $5 million. The interest is 9%. The loan fee is $50,000. So we're left with $4,500,000 for the gap loan. So altogether, our loan is now $14,851,250, but we have to pay back $16,375,000 later in the recoupment schedule because we need to pay the loan fee and the interest charges. Let's take a look at the second part of our finance plan with all the other finance sources. So we said we have a loan of 14,851,250. We have the down payment of 1,625,000. So now let's see what else we have. The production incentive is 30% of the below the line, which is 18 million. So the production incentive is going to be 5,400,000. The co-producer fee on that is 5%, so 270,000 are deducted, leaving us with a net incentive of 5,130,000. We get the crowdfunding of 250. We pay an admin fee of 15%, so that leaves us with 212,500. We get brand integration of 350. That leaves us with 262,500 after we paid the agency 25%. And then we have post-production where we have 15%, but deferring 1,875,000. So altogether, we have 22,81,250, which leaves us with an investment that is needed of 1,043,750 from our equity investor. So let's take a look at our recoupment. First, we are going to establish our revenues. We have US and international distribution revenues established at 26,250,000, as we mentioned earlier. Of that, we received already 1,625,000 from the distributors as a down payment. So we're only receiving now 24,625,000 into our collection account. So that means that the worldwide revenues are now placed in the collection account and expenses can now be paid from that. Let's take a look at our expenses. We have 1% that is due to the collection agent. 1% of 24,625,000 is 246,250. Then we have the senior loan that we have to pay back, including the interest and the loan fee. That was 16,375,000. Our sales agent is charging us 15% and 1%. 15% sales fee, 1% distribution expenses. So altogether, we're paying them 4,200,000. Then we have to pay the SAC residuals for $50,000. We're paying the equity back from 1,043,750 plus the premium. So altogether, we're paying 1,252,500 to the equity investor. So we're now paying the post-production deferment of 1,875,000 plus the 10% premium on that, which totals to 2,062,500. So altogether, our expenses come to 24,186,250. So now let's take a look at the profit participation that we now have to pay. The equity investor gets 50%. They had invested in relation to the budget at the time 4.18%. So they get 2.9% in profit participation, which is 2.9% of 438,750. And we got to the 438,750 the way we do by taking all our revenues, which is 24,625,000, deducting all our expenses, which is 24,186,250, leaving us with 438,750. Equity investor is paid first, and there is the director that's also paid 15%, the showrunner and the lead cast, they each have 15% of 438,750, so that is each 65,812.50. So altogether, we have paid 206,596.41 in profit participation, leaving us with 232,153.59. So of that, we're sharing with our co-producer, so we each are then left with 116,076.80. So this season Kill Me Now, season 1 is produced, and we have just done the case study for our first season. We're now going to do season 2. And there are a few things that will be changing, and you're going to apply this in order to do your discussion board postings with the season 2 correct answer. So we're going to change the budget to become $30 million. Netflix increased its license fee for season 2 to 40% instead of 35% of the budget. We're changing the shooting location because we're now shooting in Spain, where we work with a Spanish co-producer who's charging us 15% of the incentive, and also again shares the back end with us equally. And the Spanish incentive is 30% of the below the line cost, and the below the line is 21 million. The post-production budget increases to 20% of the budget, and 50% are being deferred again under the same terms as for season 1. So the question now is, how much profits do we make as the producer for season 2? This is your summary for week 9. If you have any questions about this week's module, feel free to contact me on Canvas and I'll be happy to answer them, or we can set a one-on-one Zoom meeting where we can go through your questions and answer them for you.